The Tower of Fate had been bleeding light for 3 days. Dr. Fate stood at the highest chamber, hands pressed against stone that hummed wrong. The wards felt thin. Not broken thin, like fabric stretched over something trying to push through. Nabu's voice whispered through the helm, listing probabilities that all ended the same way. Something was coming. John Constantine leaned against the doorframe, cigarette smoke curling toward ceiling glyphs that pulsed red. He'd been talking for 20 minutes about Hell's current political situation, about deals made and debts called, about a daughter lost and a father who might be motivated to surface if the right bait dangled. Fate didn't turn. You summoned Trigon. Constantine's laugh came out bitter. Summoned is a strong word. I made a phone call, left a message. The kind a concerned father might want to answer. The wards flared. Both men felt it reality, bending inward pressure building like atmosphere before a hurricane. Constantine straightened. Fate's hands began moving through casting positions he'd hoped never to use. The breach opened vertical, not a portal a tear. The tower's defenses tried to seal it and failed. Magic that had held for millennia met something that didn't acknowledge the concept of binding. The tier widened. Trigon's presence arrived first. 4 eyes burning in a space between dimensions, sulfur and rage, condensing into mass. The demon's voice shook foundation stones. This world kneels or burns. Constantine backed toward the stairs. Fate stepped forward, golden light gathering around both hands. The plan had been simple. Let Trigon distract the regime, buy time for the insurgency's hope. Superman's obsession with control would. The second breach cracked reality sideways, not hell, not any dimension Constantine recognized. The tear split perpendicular to Trigon's entrance, and the air pressure dropped so fast, both men's ears popped. Something else was using the instability, riding the wake of demonic passage like a ship catching wind. Fate's analysis came rapid and cold, not native, not terrestrial. Classification unknown. The presence that fell through tasted like ozone and static. It didn't land, it displaced, occupying space that forgot what had been there before. The tower's highest chamber suddenly felt too small. Ceiling too low, walls too close. Veldora Tempest took form in stages. First the pressure, then the impossible angles of something massive compressing into human dimensions. Finally, the shape tall blonde, wearing red fabric that moved wrong in still air. He looked around the chamber with eyes that tracked too many things simultaneously. Oh, Constantine said quietly. Oh, that's not good. Veldora's attention swept across ancient wards like reading text. His gaze caught on Fate's helm, lingered on the demonic signature still bleeding through the first breach, settled on Constantine's half-finished cigarette. When he smiled, it didn't reach anywhere important. This world likes cages, Veldora said. His voice carried harmonics that made the tower's stones resonate. How quaint. Outside Metropolis went dark for 7 seconds. Every satellite in geosynchronous orbit over the eastern seaboard reported sensor failure. The regime's monitoring stations logged the energy spike and immediately classified it as threat level unknown, the designation they used when their measuring systems couldn't quantify magnitude. In the Batcave, alarms started screaming. Bruce Wayne looked at readouts that made no sense, then reached for the communicator he'd sworn not to use. In the Hall of Justice, Superman's head snapped toward the east. He'd been in a tactical meeting about insurgency supply lines. The meeting was over. At the tower, Trigon's attention locked onto the newcomer. The demon's 4 eyes narrowed. You are not of this realm. Veldora glanced at him the way someone might notice furniture. Neither are you. But you're loud about it. The casual dismissal made Trigon's form solidify further mass, forcing itself through the breach with geological patience. I am Trigon, conqueror of... Veldora yawned. It wasn't theatrical. Wasn't meant as insult. Just genuine disinterest in credentials. He turned back to examining the tower's architecture, one hand reaching toward a ward line that had held for 3,000 years. "Don't," Fate said. Veldora's finger touched the barrier. Light exploded outward, not from the ward breaking, but from the ward trying to categorize what it had encountered and failing. The magical construct flickered through 17 colors it wasn't supposed to possess, then settled into a dull gray that suggested concussion. "Fascinating," Veldora said. "You built rules into the walls." He looked at Fate directly for the first time. "That won't hold anything that matters." Constantine was already moving toward the stairs. Fate remained still, golden light intensifying around the helm. The entity before him registered as neither demon, nor god, nor elemental. Nabu's analysis kept rewriting itself, probability engines choking on data that refused coherent classification. "State your purpose," Fate said. "The Tower of Fate stands against." Veldora waved vaguely. "I don't have one. Purpose implies direction." He took a step that covered more distance than anatomy allowed. "I was somewhere else. Now I'm here." Your angry friend's tantrum made the walls thin. Trigon's roar shook dust from ceiling beams. "I am no one's." The temperature dropped 40 degrees in 2 seconds. Not cold absence of heat, like someone had scooped thermal energy out of the air and forgotten to replace it. Veldora hadn't moved, hadn't gestured. But the space around Trigon crystallized atmosphere turning solid. The demon's next words came out frost. "You dare." Veldora smiled again. That same empty expression. "You're very concerned with hierarchy. Who dares what? Who kneels?" He tilted his head. "It's tedious." Superman arrived in a pillar of displaced air. He came through the tower's eastern wall, not bothering with doors. Kinetic force from his entry cracked support columns. He assessed the chamber in one sweep, Fate on guard. Constantine halfway downstairs, an unknown entity standing too casually among active threats. "All of you," Superman said. "Stand down, now." Fate's voice came tight. "Superman, this situation requires—" "I can see the situation," Superman cut across him. His eyes locked onto Veldora heat vision, already charging. "You. Identify yourself." Veldora looked at the man floating 3 feet off the tower floor. Took in the symbol, the cape, the posture of someone accustomed to compliance. His grin widened, just slightly. "That's precious," Veldora said. Superman moved. He crossed the distance faster than Sound Fist, already accelerating toward center mass. The punch carried enough force to pulverize concrete backed by Kryptonian muscle and 5 years of regime certainty. It should have ended the conversation. Veldora caught it, not blocked, caught. One hand palm open, absorbing the impact, like someone stopping a thrown ball. The shockwave still propagated outward, blowing out windows, cracking the tower's foundation. But the fist stopped. Superman's eyes widened. Impossible. Veldora examined the captured hand with mild interest. "You move fast." "Not fast enough, but fast." He released Superman and stepped backward, putting space between them. That was testing. "Try harder." Wonder Woman crashed through the northern wall. She'd been airborne when the alert came, already armed, already angry at another delay in regime operations. Her sword came down in an arc meant to bisect. Veldora leaned sideways. The blade passed through space he'd occupied, close enough that displaced air stirred his hair. Diana landed, pivoted, drove the blade toward his throat in a thrust that had killed gods. He bent backward, spine curving impossible angles. The sword's tip traced a line 1 inch above his windpipe. Before Diana could recover, before Superman could re-engage, Veldora straightened and took 3 steps backward. "Enough testing," he said. Superman felt it first, a wrongness in his bones' vibration. At frequencies Kryptonian physiology wasn't designed to process. Diana's grip on her sword shifted involuntarily, weight distribution changing without conscious command. The air pressure inverted. Windows that had survived Superman's entrance exploded outward. The tower's remaining wards shattered simultaneously, 3 millennia of protective magic failing in cascade. Outside the sky over Metropolis turned the color of old bruises. Veldora's form flickered, still human-shaped, but with edges that refused to stay fixed. Around him, reality bent subtle and wrong. Furniture started sliding toward him, not from gravity but from space itself, trying to collapse inward. Then it stopped. The pressure vanished. The reality distortion smoothed. Veldora stood normal again, hands in pockets, expression curious. "Interesting," he said. "You're very committed to the violence-first approach." Superman charged heat vision. Diana raised her sword. Both moved to strike simultaneously, coordinated assault meant to overwhelm defense. Veldora sighed and disappeared, not teleportation displacement. The space he'd occupied folded closed like a door shutting. Superman's heat vision carved through empty air and vaporized a section of wall. Diana's blade meant nothing. He reappeared on the tower's roof. Metropolis spread below city lights, beginning to flicker as power grids responded to the electromagnetic interference bleeding off his presence. He could feel eyes turning toward him, satellites, sensors, the regime's entire surveillance apparatus, trying to categorize the threat. Veldora looked at the sky, tested the atmosphere. Let his senses spread outward, cataloging this world's fundamental laws. Gravity worked slightly different. Magic operated on principles adjacent to, but distinct from what he knew. Solar radiation carried unusual properties. Something in him drank in the data. Not just observing understanding, reverse engineering the frameworks that made this reality function. Learning the rules so he could decide which ones mattered. Below in the tower's ruined chamber, Superman was giving orders. Lockdown protocols, containment teams. Every resource the regime possessed, mobilizing toward a single target. On the roof, Veldora smiled at the stars. This was going to be entertaining. All right. This story's intro was quite intense already. You usually see Superman just crush anyone who stands in his way, especially in this injustice world, where he's a total dictator. But Veldora just caught that punch like a slow baseball. It is really interesting to see someone look at the strongest heroes on Earth and just yawn at them. I think Veldora is not just strong, but he operates on totally different rules than other DC characters. Because Superman is used to people being scared of him, but this guy treats him like a noisy kid. Do you guys think Superman is going to realize he is outmatched, or will his ego make him do something stupid? Let me know in the comments, and let's see how the regime reacts right now. Superman floated above Metropolis at an altitude where the curvature became visible. Below, emergency response teams cordoned off 12 city blocks. Evacuation protocols ran smooth. 5 years of regime drilling meant people moved when told. No panic, no questions. He'd left Wonder Woman coordinating ground assets. Now he watched the figure on the ruined tower calculating approach vectors. The entity hadn't moved since displacing to the roof. Just stood there examining stars like a tourist reading signs. Superman's vision tracked heat signatures, electromagnetic patterns, cellular structures. The readings fluctuated between 17 different configurations, none of them stable. His communicator crackled. Diana's voice came through crisp. "Analysis," unknown Superman said. "Threat level maximum. Commence Protocol 7. Are you certain Protocol 7 meant lethal force authorized collateral damage acceptable within designated combat zone?" Diana never questioned tactical decisions, but she asked for confirmation on this tier. Superman's jaw set. "I'm certain." He dropped. Mach 4 by the second mile. Kinetic energy building fist cocked back. The punch would hit like orbital bombardment. He'd used it twice before, once on Doomsday, once on a metahuman who'd thought immunity meant invincibility. Both times it worked. Veldora turned his head 1 degree. Superman's fist connected with what should have been a sternum. The impact generated a shockwave that shattered glass 3 blocks out. Car alarm screamed. The rooftop cracked in concentric circles. Veldora stood exactly where he'd been standing, not braced, not deflecting, just occupying space that refused to acknowledge force properly. Superman felt the feedback wrong, like punching through water that had forgotten how to splash. "Interesting choice," Veldora said. "Lead with certainty." Superman didn't answer. He fired heat vision point-blank twin beams hot enough to cut through reinforced steel. The beams struck center mass and bent. Not reflected bent, curving around the target like light passing through warped glass. "You're very committed," Veldora observed. "Do you ever negotiate first?" "Stand down," Superman said. "Final warning." Veldora smiled that empty smile. Or what? Wonder Woman came through the opposite wall. She timed it for Superman's heat vision, using the distraction to close distance. Her sword came down in an overhead arc designed to split shields. The blade carried blessings from 3 pantheons and had tasted god blood. It passed through Veldora's shoulder, not cutting, passing a through like he'd gone briefly incorporeal. Diana's momentum carried her past. She pivoted mid-air, lasso already spinning. The golden rope snaked out, wrapping around Veldora's torso in 3 coils. "Compel truth," she commanded. The lasso tightened. Diana felt the familiar pull, the magic engaging with a target's core identity. Then nothing. Not resistance absence, like trying to grab smoke. Veldora looked down at the rope. "That's interesting. What's it supposed to do?" "Bind you to honesty," Diana said. She pulled the lasso tighter. "It responds to—" "There's nothing to respond to," Veldora said. "Not unkindly. Just factual. Your tool looks for something I don't have." He shrugged and the lasso slid off. Didn't break, didn't stretch. Just stopped being relevant to his position in space. Superman hit him again. Different angle, different approach. Uppercut from below, fast enough that air ignited from friction. The punch landed clean. Veldora's head snapped back 2 inches, then returned to neutral. He blinked once. "That one had leverage," he said. "You're learning." Diana landed beside Superman's, sword raised in guard position. Her tactical mind worked through the data. Target demonstrated intangibility, spatial manipulation, immunity to physical trauma, resistance to divine artifacts. Standard combat doctrine ineffective. "We need containment," she said quietly. Superman's eyes never left Veldora. Agreed. He triggered the communicator. "Dr. Fate, report to coordinates." Veldora tilted his head. "You're calling for the magician." Smart. He took a step forward. Superman and Diana both moved flanking positions, ready to intercept. Veldora stopped. "Relax," he said. "I'm just stretching my legs." The sky darkened 3 shades. Not clouds, the color of light itself, shifting sun becoming dimmer without setting. Temperature dropped fast enough that moisture in the air crystallized briefly before sublimating. Around Veldora, space began doing things space wasn't supposed to do. Distances stretched. Straight lines curved. The rooftop's geometry became negotiable. Superman charged again. This time he came from above, driving downward with both fists, putting Kryptonian strength and planetary mass behind the blow. Veldora raised one hand, caught both fists. Didn't absorb impact, just stopped it, like momentum had hit a wall written into physics. "You keep hitting the same solution," Veldora said. He pushed gently. Superman flew backward, 200 meters, not from force but from space, deciding he should be elsewhere. He arrested his trajectory, hovering, recalculating. Diana rushed in from the side sword work, precise, looking for openings. There were no openings. Every strike went through empty air that had been occupied a microsecond earlier. Not speed displacement. Veldora wasn't dodging. He was declining to be where attacks happened. Diana's blade cut through his afterimage 12 times in 4 seconds. On the 13th strike, Veldora caught the blade between two fingers. "Good technique," he said. "Very clean." He released the sword. Diana pulled back, breathing controlled but working harder than she had in months. Superman repositioned heat vision ready. Veldora looked at them both. Assessed their stances, their coordination, the professional efficiency of career warriors. Then he glanced at the city below. "You're protecting that," he said. "Not a question." "Yes," Superman said. "Even from me," Veldora continued. "Because I'm unknown, uncontrolled." "You're a threat," Diana said. "Until proven otherwise." Veldora nodded slowly. "That's fair." He looked back at Superman. "You make rules. Enforce them with power. Maintain order through strength." "That's right," Superman said. Veldora's smile widened slightly. "This world has bad memories about that approach." He raised his hand. Superman tensed, ready to intercept whatever came next. Diana shifted her weight sword, angled for a vertical slash. Veldora snapped his fingers. The electromagnetic spectrum inverted. Every satellite feed in geosynchronous orbit went white. Ground-based sensors registered readings that broke their calibration ranges. In the Batcave, monitors screamed warnings about localized reality distortion. At the Hall of Justice, emergency systems engaged automatically. In Metropolis, power failed for 7 blocks, then 10, then 20. Not destroyed, disconnected. Every electrical system in a 3-mile radius suddenly forgot how to conduct current. Lights died, computers shut down, regime surveillance went blind. The darkness lasted 9 seconds. When power returned, Veldora was standing in the same spot. Superman and Diana hadn't moved. Around them, the city struggled to reboot systems that couldn't explain what had just happened. "That wasn't an attack," Veldora said quietly. "That was me existing nearby." He met Superman's eyes. "You understand the difference?" Superman's hands clenched. "We'll find a way to stop you." "Probably not," Veldora said. "Not because you're weak, because you're thinking about this wrong." Wonder Woman stepped forward. "Then tell us how to think about it." Veldora considered her for a moment. "Like weather," he said finally. "You don't fight storms. You adapt, evacuate, wait them out." "We don't run from threats," Superman said. "That's your problem," Veldora replied. "Not mine." He turned away, looking back toward the stars. Superman tensed, ready to capitalize on the apparent dismissal. Diana caught his arm, subtle warning. Something in her expression suggested patience. Dr. Fate materialized 6 feet behind Veldora. Golden light coalesced into armored form, the helm's eyeslits burning with power borrowed from order itself. Fate's arrival brought a sense of weight, like gravity had opinion. Veldora didn't turn around. "The magician's here." Fate's voice resonated. "You will be contained." Veldora sighed. "There it is." He did turn, then facing Fate directly. "You're all very focused on cages. The entity before us cannot be permitted to remain unbound," Fate said. The pronouncement came from Nabu more than the human host. "Order demands equilibrium." Veldora's expression changed. Not angry. Something colder. "You want to bind me." "It is necessary," Fate said. The air pressure dropped so fast that Diana's ears popped. Superman felt it in his chest, something fundamental turning hostile. Veldora's casual demeanor evaporated like morning frost. When he spoke again, his voice carried harmonics that made the building a shake. "Try." Fate began casting. Golden glyphs materialized in concentric rings, ancient words that predated human language. The spell structure built layer upon layer, binding, sealing, redirecting. Magic designed to contain gods. Veldora stood motionless and let the working complete. The glyphs settled around him like chains. For 3 seconds they held. Then something in Veldora's existence simply refused the concept of confinement. The magic didn't break it, forgot what it was supposed to do. Fate stepped back, helm flaring brighter. "That should not be possible. You keep saying that," Veldora said. He looked at Superman, at Diana, at Fate. All of you. You keep trying to make me fit your framework." He smiled, and this time there was something genuinely dangerous in it. "I don't." Superman moved forward. "We will find a way." "Yes," Veldora said. "You will. And it will make everything worse." He looked up at the sky one more time, then back at the three most powerful beings the regime could field. His expression settled into something almost pitying. "You're going to try to imprison me," he said, like the last people who thought they could. His eyes held no anger, just certainty. That's when I stopped being curious. "What happens then?" Diana asked. Veldora's smile faded completely. "Then I remember what I am." He disappeared. Not teleportation, not flight. Simply ceased being present. The space he'd occupied collapsed inward, with a sound like thunder played backward. Superman, Diana, and Dr. Fate stood on the ruined rooftop. Below, Metropolis struggled to restore order. Satellites came back online. Regime command channels opened. Superman's jaw set in familiar lines. Containment protocols. Full implementation. Diana nodded. Wonder Woman didn't question. Fate remained silent, but through the helm, Nabu calculated probabilities. All of them led to the same conclusion. This would require cages. Kent Nelson felt Nabu's calculations running faster than they had in decades. The helm weighed heavy tonight. Not physically, the burden came from elsewhere. From probabilities collapsing into certainty, futures narrowing to single paths. Nabu didn't speak in words often, but when ancient intelligences grew quiet, that meant worse things than this speech. They stood in the tower's reconstructed sanctum. Superman had authorized whatever resources Dr. Fate required. Wonder Woman coordinated perimeter security. Constantine leaned against a wall, cigarette smoke curling through protective circles he'd drawn himself. The entity sat in the center of it all, not restrained. Not yet. Veldora had returned on his own, walked through regime lines like they were suggestions, and settled cross-legged within the prepared binding zone. Watching them work with that unreadable expression. "You're making this elaborate," Veldora said. His voice carried no mockery. Just observation. Fate's hands moved through preparatory gestures. "Containment requires precision." Veldora tilted his head. "You've done this before, many times," Fate said. The words came from Nabu more than Nelson. "We have imprisoned demons, sealed breaches, bound gods who forgot their place." "And you think I'm like them," Veldora said. Fate paused. The helm's golden light flickered once. "You are a threat to ordered reality. That is sufficient." Veldora's smile held no warmth. "Fair enough." Constantine exhaled smoke through his teeth. "This is a mistake." Superman's voice came through the communication link, cold and certain. "Proceed." Constantine looked at Dr. Fate. "You feel it too. Don't pretend you don't." Fate resumed the casting. "What I feel is irrelevant to what must be done." The first ward activated. Ancient Sumerian predating, written history. Light traced geometric patterns across stone floor, each angle calculated to redirect dimensional stress. The glyph settled around Veldora like the first bar of a cage. He didn't move, just observed. Second ward. Sanskrit mantras that had sealed asuras beneath mountains. The spell work layered over the first, creating interference patterns designed to collapse quantum possibilities. Reality around Veldora began defining itself more rigidly. His expression didn't change. Third ward. Egyptian binding rites that had held Set's avatar for 3,000 years. The magic condensed weight pressing down from conceptual directions. Space itself contracted, trying to reduce Veldora's presence to manageable dimensions. For the first time, he reacted, not movement, just attention. Like someone hearing a sound they hadn't expected. His eyes tracked the ward structure with sudden focus. "Fate," Constantine said quietly. "Stop." Fourth ward. Fate's hands moved faster now, building momentum. Greek theurgy from the mystery cults reinforced with Chaldean astronomy. The binding tightened layers upon layers, each spell holding the others in place. Veldora's breathing changed, became shallower, not from exertion, from something else. Fifth ward engaged. Nordic rune chains, the kind that had bound Fenrir. The magic wrapped around Veldora's limbs, not touching but defining boundaries he couldn't cross. His hands clenched. Sixth ward, the final layer. Fate drew power directly from the helm, from Nabu's reserves, from the accumulated authority of every Lord of Order who had worn this artifact. The spell completed in a cascade of golden light. The cage closed. For 17 seconds it held. Veldora sat perfectly still within concentric rings of active magic. Each ward pulsed with power, maintaining dimensional locks that would contain anything short of a god. Fate felt the structure solid, interwoven, functional. Then Veldora spoke. "Not," he said, very quietly. "Not this." The temperature plummeted. Not gradually, instantly, like heat had been deleted from local physics. Constantine's breath misted. Frost crawled across stone that hadn't known cold in millennia. Something in Veldora's chest began glowing. Not heat, not energy, something that light bent around rather than through. Fate's analytical protocols screamed warnings. The entity's nature was shifting, reconfiguring, accessing reserves that hadn't been present before. Nabu's calculations rewrote themselves, then rewrote again, probability engines choking on impossible data. "This is not a future I can close," Nabu whispered through the helm. Veldora's eyes opened fully. They'd been blue before casual observing. Now they carried something older. Not rage. Recognition. 300 years, Veldora said. Each word precisely articulated. I sat in dark, alone, sealed. He looked directly at fate. "You're trying to put me back. We seek only to—" No, Veldora interrupted. His voice hadn't risen, hadn't changed pitch, but reality itself seemed to lean away from the sound. "You want a cage, because I don't fit your control, because I'm outside your framework." The first ward cracked, not from force, from incompatibility. The Sumerian binding had been designed for entities that followed certain metaphysical rules. Veldora didn't follow those rules. The spell tried to adapt, found nothing to adapt to, and fractured. The second ward lasted 6 more seconds before the same thing happened. Fate poured more energy into the structure. Superman's voice came through the link demanding status updates. Constantine was already backing toward the door. Veldora stood. The motion carried no drama. He simply rose to his feet within the failing containment. The third ward shattered as his shoulder passed through it. The fourth bent around him, like a suggestion he'd declined to acknowledge. "Stop," Fate commanded. Nabu's full power channeled through the helm, golden light bright enough to burn shadows into walls. "Stop or face the consequences of order itself." Veldora met his gaze. "I already did that," Veldora said. "Once." He took a step forward. The fifth ward crumbled. "I let someone seal me because I was curious, because I thought isolation might be interesting." He took another step. The sixth ward flickered, stability failing. It wasn't. The final binding collapsed. Veldora stood free in the center of broken magic. Around him, the sanctum's geometry started forgetting how to be stable. Angles didn't quite meet. Distances became approximate. The laws holding the room together relaxed their grip. Fate raised both hands, already building a new working. Different approach, not containment, but redirection, pushing the threat into dimensional exile. Veldora's hand moved, faster than perception. One moment at his side, next moment, palm out toward fate. No attack came, just pressure. The kind that made organs remember they were made of fragile tissue bones. Recall they were hollow structures, blood understand it, preferred being liquid. Fate's spell dissolved before completion. The helm's protection held barely, but Nelson inside felt something he hadn't experienced in 40 years of hosting Naboo. Fear, not Naboo's fear. The ancient intelligence didn't process emotions that way. But the helm's calculations had arrived at a conclusion, and that conclusion carried the emotional weight of fear for anyone capable of understanding it. This entity could not be contained, could not be redirected, could not be sealed. Any attempt would fail, and in failing, would make things incalculably worse. Veldora lowered his hand. The pressure vanished. Fate staggered back one step, catching himself against a pillar. "I don't want to hurt you," Veldora said. He looked around the ruined sanctum at the broken wards, at Constantine frozen by the door. "I didn't come here to fight, but you keep trying to make me into something I'm not." "What are you?" Fate asked. The question came from Nelson more than Naboo. Veldora considered the question. "Free," he said finally, "and very old, and not interested in being locked away again." He turned toward the door. Constantine pressed himself against the wall, letting Veldora pass. The entity paused beside him, close enough to speak quietly. "You knew," Veldora said. Constantine's laugh came out bitter. "Yeah, I knew. Why didn't you stop them?" Constantine met his eyes. "Would you have listened?" Veldora smiled without humor. "Probably not." He continued toward the exit. Behind him, Fate struggled to stand, to rebuild, to find some option that Naboo's calculations insisted didn't exist. The helm's golden light had dimmed to almost nothing. Superman's voice crackled through the communicator. "Status." Fate looked at the shattered wards, at the room where reality still hadn't quite stabilized, at Constantine lighting another cigarette with shaking hands. "Containment has failed," Fate said. "The entity is mobile. Recommend immediate evacuation of Wasun." No Superman interrupted. His voice carried the absolute certainty that had defined 5 years of regime rule. "We don't evacuate. We escalate." Fate felt Naboo trying to calculate what escalation meant in this context. Every scenario ended the same way. But order didn't surrender. Order adapted, found new methods, applied greater force. "Understood," Fate said. The communication link closed. Constantine looked at him through cigarette smoke. "You're going to help them build a bigger cage," Constantine said. "Not a question." Fate's hands had already begun moving through new configurations. "I will do what order demands." "Order's an idiot," Constantine said. Fate didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because somewhere inside the helm, Nelson agreed. But Naboo's imperatives were absolute. The threat must be contained. If one method failed, try another. If that failed, try a third. Keep trying until something worked, or until there was nothing left to contain. Outside, Veldora walked through Metropolis. Regime forces tracked him, but didn't engage. Satellites logged his position. Command centers prepared contingencies. He'd told them what would happen if they tried to imprison him. They were already planning the next attempt. Above the city, storm clouds gathered that hadn't been in any weather forecast. The air tasted like ozone, an inevitability. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled without lightning. In the ruined sanctum, Fate continued casting. Constantine watched for another minute, then left without saying goodbye. He'd seen this movie before, knew how it ended. The good guys kept fighting. The bad guys kept fighting. And reality paid the price for everyone's certainty. Okay, things just got very personal. We finally learned why Veldora is so calm until they try to trap him. Being stuck in the dark for 300 years is a nightmare, so it makes total sense that he refuses to be caged again. It is also ironic that Dr. Fate and the others are so obsessed with order that they are creating their own worst enemy. Veldora was happy to just sit there until they tried to bind him. Honestly, regime thinks they own everyone, but they cannot own a storm. It just feels like Constantine is the only one who actually gets it. But honestly, I do think that Veldora is just defending his own freedom. The Batcave systems failed in sequence, not catastrophically. Just stopped responding. Bruce Wayne watched 23 monitoring stations go dark across a span of 90 seconds. No error messages, no warnings. The screens simply forgot they were supposed to display information. He ran diagnostics. Everything checked functional, power supply nominal, network integrity confirmed. The equipment worked perfectly, except for the part where it refused to work. Oracle's voice came through the backup channel. I'm seeing the same thing across the eastern seaboard. Regime satellites just went blind. Bruce pulled up the last coherent data feed. Weather patterns over Metropolis had inverted. High pressure where low should be. Wind moving against thermal gradients. The atmosphere itself behaving like someone had rewritten basic physics and forgotten to tell anyone. He's not attacking, Bruce said quietly. What Oracle's confusion came through clear. He's adapting. Bruce shut down the useless monitors, making the world less convenient for those who depend on systems. In the silence that followed, something in the cave's geological foundations shifted. Not an earthquake. More like the stone deciding it had been oriented wrong for the last 1,000,000 years and correcting course. Bats stirred in the upper reaches, disoriented. Bruce looked toward Metropolis on the main screen, watching red clouds gather against all meteorological probability, and we gave him a reason. Superman hovered 3,000 feet above the Hall of Justice. From here, he could see the entire crisis unfold. Blackouts rippling outward in concentric rings, transportation networks stuttering, communication relays dropping packets. Not damaged, confused. Infrastructure that had worked flawlessly for 5 years suddenly couldn't remember how. His communicator cycled through channels. Half were static. The other half carried reports that made no tactical sense. Pilots reporting instruments that showed contradictory readings, all accurate. Ground teams unable to maintain formation despite clear sight lines. Medical centers where equipment diagnosed patients correctly, but couldn't agree on basic measurements like temperature. Superman descended to the command center. Diana met him at the entrance, her expression carved from controlled frustration. Status, he asked. Degrading, she said. No pattern to the failures? No central point of attack? She pulled up holographic displays showing regime assets across 12 cities. Half the markers blinked uncertainty. We're losing coordination. He's one target, Superman said. Weakened it. Collar. Diana's use of his Kryptonian name stopped him. This isn't a target. It's a phenomenon. Then we contain the phenomenon. We tried that. Superman's jaw tightened. Then we escalate containment. Diana said nothing. But something in her silence felt like disagreement. She was too disciplined to voice. What? Constantine stood on a rooftop in Gotham, watching the sky wrong itself. He'd seen apocalypses, plural, watched dimensions bleed into each other, witnessed the kind of horror that made hell look welcoming. This wasn't that. This was tidier, more surgical. The thing people forgot about cosmic-level entities, they didn't need to try very hard. Didn't need to be angry. They just existed in ways that made normal existence inconvenient. He lit a cigarette with fingers that only shook slightly. Smoke rose and then didn't caught in an updraft that violated local wind patterns. Constantine watched it spiral impossible directions. His phone rang. Zatanna. Tell me you're seeing this, she said without preamble. Yeah, Constantine exhaled. I'm seeing it. Can you stop it? No. Can anyone? Constantine looked at the red clouds gathering over Metropolis. Watched lightning arc between them, without thunder, without rain, without any of the things lightning was supposed to bring. This is what happens when the universe answers back, he said. We poked something that doesn't poke easy. Now it's poking back. That's not an answer, Zatanna said. It's the only answer there is. Constantine dropped the cigarette, stepped on it, started walking toward the edge of the roof. We tried to cage a storm because that's what we do. Make rules, build boxes. He stopped at the ledge, looking down at Gotham streets, where traffic lights cycled through patterns they'd never been programmed for. Only sometimes the storm decides the box wasn't polite. "What are you going to do?" Zatanna asked. "What I always do," Constantine said. "Survive. Then feel bad about it later." He hung up, pulled his coat tighter against wind that came from 7 directions simultaneously, started the long walk down. Behind him, the sky over Metropolis darkened 3 more shades. No one in Metropolis panicked. That was almost worse than if they had. 5 years of regime conditioning meant people followed evacuation orders without question. They moved to designated shelters, filed into underground stations with the efficiency of practiced drills, waited for the all-clear that everyone knew wasn't coming. But in the silence of those shelters, people noticed things. Electronics that worked but didn't help. GPS that showed accurate positions to 3 decimal places but couldn't agree on which direction was north. Clocks that kept perfect time but in increments no one recognized. A child in Shelter 7 asked her mother why the lights were blue. "They're not blue," the mother said, looking at the clearly white emergency lighting. The child insisted, pointed, described a color that wasn't blue but wasn't anything else either. Other children nearby agreed. Saw it too. The adults saw white. No one argued. Arguments required shared reference points. Those were becoming negotiable. In Shelter 12, someone's smartphone connected to networks that didn't exist. Downloaded updates from servers that hadn't been built. Displayed news from tomorrow or yesterday, or timelines where neither made sense. The phone's owner turned it off, turned it back on. Same thing. She put it away and didn't mention it. 3 blocks from this Hall of Justice, a regime checkpoint reported everything normal, then clarified that normal no longer meant what it used to mean. Then stopped reporting because the communication protocols had developed opinions about which messages mattered. The checkpoint remained staffed. Soldiers stood at posts, followed procedures. But everyone understood they were decorative now. The city wasn't listening to human authority. It was listening to something else. Veldora walked through downtown Metropolis, not storming, not raging, just walking. People saw him and moved aside, not from fear, but from something more fundamental. The way water flows around obstacles, finding new paths without considering alternatives. He stopped at an intersection where traffic signals had given up pretending. Red, yellow, green, all illuminated simultaneously. Cars sat motionless, drivers staring at the contradiction. Veldora looked up at the signals, tilted his head slightly. The lights cycled properly for exactly 12 seconds, then resumed their confused state. He continued walking. Behind him, the intersection began operating on a schedule that worked for local traffic flow, but would make civil engineers weep. Every car got exactly the green light it needed, when it needed, without any pattern a computer could optimize. It functioned perfectly. Just not according to any rules the city had been built on. Veldora reached the harbor, stood looking at water that had started moving in Fibonacci spirals. Ships rocked at anchor, not from waves, but from something playing with how gravity interacted with liquid mass. He knelt, touched the water. It calmed, returned to normal behavior. He removed his hand and stood. The spirals resumed 3 seconds later. Not malicious, not intentional, just his presence changed how things worked. The world around him struggled to maintain coherence. Some things adapted, some things broke. Nothing stayed the same. He looked back toward the Hall of Justice, toward where Superman would be coordinating, planning, trying to restore what Veldora's existence kept dissolving. "You're still going to try," Veldora said quietly. "To no one. To everyone. You're going to build a bigger cage." Thunder rolled across the harbor. Still no lightning, still no rain, just acknowledgement. In the regime command center, Superman reviewed options that all required infrastructure that had stopped being reliable. Teleport grid compromised. Satellite network intermittent. Ground communications functional, but increasingly creative about what constituted a coherent message. Every system reported operational status, while simultaneously demonstrating otherwise. Dr. Fate materialized beside him. The helm's glow had dimmed since the containment failure. Analysis, Superman asked. The entity is not attacking our systems, Fate said. He is existing near them. The proximity is sufficient. Then we remove the proximity, Superman said. Forced relocation, dimensional exile. Fate's hesitation lasted exactly 2 seconds. That was attempted. It failed. Then we try again, Superman said. Harder. Wonder Woman spoke from across the command center, Cal. We need to consider alternative approaches. There are no alternatives, Superman said. His voice carried the absolute certainty that had held the regime together through 5 years of impossible decisions. We maintain order. That's what we do. Even when order stops working, Diana asked quietly. Especially then, the lights flickered. Not from power failure, from the electrical current developing preferences about which circuits it wanted to flow through. Backup systems engaged, then disengaged, then engaged to different criteria. Superman watched the readouts destabilize, watched his carefully constructed command infrastructure become unreliable, watched 5 years of control fray at the edges. He was the most powerful being on the planet. Could move faster than sound, see through walls, hear heartbeats from miles away. None of it mattered against a problem that wasn't about power. It was about context, and the context had changed. Assemble all available assets, Superman said. His voice didn't waver. We are ending this. Diana looked at him, saw something she recognized from years ago. Before the regime, before Metropolis, before choices that couldn't be undone, she saw certainty, absolute and unwavering. And for the first time in 5 years, she wondered if certainty was enough. Constantine reached his apartment as the first real rain started. Real rain. Not the atmospheric confusion that had been masquerading as weather for the last 6 hours. Actual water falling from actual clouds that obeyed actual physics. He stood at the window watching it come down. Clean, normal, temporary. The storm wasn't attacking, he said to his empty apartment. It was correcting something. He poured whiskey, drank it, poured another. Tomorrow, Superman would make his move. Would try something bigger, harder, more certain. Would escalate because that's what power did when challenged. And the storm would respond, not with anger, with adjustment. Constantine raised his glass to the window, to the red clouds still visible through the rain, to the thing walking through Metropolis that everyone kept calling a threat. To your health, he said. And to ours. We're going to need it. Outside, thunder answered. This time there was lightning. Constantine knew the smell of divine judgment. 20 years of dealing with angels, demons, and things that predated both had taught him the difference between genuine cosmic authority and something wearing its skin. Real judgment felt heavy. Like gravity. Like truth you couldn't dodge even if you wanted to. This didn't feel heavy. It felt playful. He stood in the ruins of what used to be a regime detention facility. 3 hours ago, it had held 47 metahumans awaiting trial. Now it held architecture that couldn't decide which dimension it belonged to. Walls bent at angles geometry hadn't approved. Floors existed on principles that made surveyors weep. And bodies, 12 of them, not the metahumans. They'd been released torn from cells by force that treated steel like wet paper. No, these bodies wore regime uniforms. Guards, administrators, people who'd been doing their jobs. The specter stood in the center of it all. 7 feet tall, pale flesh, green cloak that moved independent of wind. The visual matched every description Constantine had filed away over decades of occult research. Voice of vengeance, wrath of God. The entity that made hell nervous. Except the edges were too sharp. The proportions slightly exaggerated. Like someone had drawn the specter from memory instead of observation. Constantine lit a cigarette with hands that wanted to shake. took a long drag, exhaled toward the figure. "You're not him," Constantine said. The specter's head turned. Slowly. Too slowly. Movement that suggested joints were optional. When it spoke, the voice resonated from everywhere and nowhere. "Judgment has come," the specter said. "These servants of tyranny have been weighed, found wanting." Constantine looked at the nearest body. Young woman, maybe 25, file folder still clutched in dead hands. Her crime had been processing paperwork. "Bit harsh, mate," Constantine said. "She was a clerk." "Complicity is guilt," the specter pronounced. "All who serve the machine share the machine's sin." Constantine took another drag. Stalling, thinking. The real specter judged precisely. Surgical. This thing was painting with a broader brush, enjoying the spectacle. "Where's Jim Corrigan?" Constantine asked. Corrigan was the specter's human host. Had been for decades. The specter smiled. That was wrong too. The real specter didn't smile. It delivered. This thing looked delighted. "The host is unnecessary," it said. "Judgment requires no mortal anchor." "Right," Constantine said. "Course not." He flicked ash toward a corpse and started walking. Slowly. Toward the exit, hoping he'd make it. "You flee?" the specter asked. "I'm relocating," Constantine said. Tactical withdrawal, very different. The specter raised one hand. Constantine felt reality lock around him. Not physical restraint, existential. The concept of leaving became unavailable in his immediate vicinity. "You will witness," the specter said. "All must witness." Constantine stopped fighting the compulsion, turned back. "Yeah. All right, I'm witnessing." "Good." The specter gestured. 3 more regime soldiers materialized, pulled from somewhere else screaming. They hit the ground hard, looked up at the figure looming over them. "You have murdered in the name of order," the specter intoned. Crushed freedom beneath authority's boot, the judgment. One of the soldiers was crying. Couldn't be older than 19. The other 2 looked defiant, but Constantine had seen enough scared people pretending bravery to recognize the performance. "Wait," Constantine said. His mouth moved before his brain approved. "Those 3 specifically do what?" "They enforce the regime's will," the specter said. "That is sufficient." "Jesus," Constantine muttered. "You're not even checking." The entity's head tilted. Its grin widened. "Checking is for those who doubt." "I do not doubt." "Yeah," Constantine said quietly. "That's the problem." The specter raised both hands. The soldiers began screaming before anything visible happened. Their bodies didn't tear apart, they simplified, became less, reduced to component concepts, and scattered across philosophical categories. It took 11 seconds. Constantine counted. Made himself watch. Made himself remember this for later, when he'd need evidence that this wasn't justice. It was performance art using people as paint. When it finished, the specter turned to Constantine. "You disapprove. I think you're overdoing it," Constantine said. "Actual vengeance doesn't need an audience. All acts require witness," the specter said. "Without observation, justice becomes theoretical." Constantine's jaw tightened. "That's not how the real specter talks." The entity paused. Something flickered across its face. Not concern, interest. "You've met him?" Once Constantine lied. Bollocks encounter. He was very boring about the whole precise retribution thing. Very measured. He ground out the cigarette. "You're much more entertaining." The specter's smile returned. Wider now. "I am what judgment should be. Spectacular." There it was. Constantine filed the word away. Contacted Oracle through his jacket's hidden comm. 1-word message, imp. Then he kept the thing talking. "What's next on your spectacular agenda?" The specter gestured grandly. "The Hall of Justice. Where tyranny sits in marble luxury. Where Superman pretends authority he stole." "You're going to judge Superman," Constantine said. "Among others," the specter agreed. "All who participate in the regime's machinery. all who chose order over freedom. That's a lot of people, Constantine observed. The work of judgment is never small, right? Constantine backed toward a wall that looked more stable than the others. Just checking, you planning to judge the entire eastern seaboard today, or pacing yourself? The specter didn't answer. It vanished. Not teleportation deletion. The space it occupied forgot something had been there. Constantine sagged against the wall, pulled out his phone, hands shaking now that he wasn't under observation. Oracle picked up immediately, confirmed. Yeah, Constantine said. It's not Spectre. It's a fifth-dimensional imp wearing his face. MXYZ PTLK Oracle said. Files say he's a cosmic-level arsehole with reality editing privileges, Constantine finished. Yeah, that's the one. Can you stop him? Constantine laughed. It came out bitter. Me no. I can barely annoy him. He looked at the bodies, at the walls that had given up being Euclidean. This requires someone who operates on his level. Superman won't work, Constantine interrupted. Mexi plays with physics like it's silly putty. We need someone who isn't bound by local rules. Oracle paused. You mean the storm? Constantine closed his eyes. Yeah, I mean the storm. The one we just spent 3 days trying to imprison. That's the one. There was silence on the line. Then I'll inform Batman. He's the only one Superman might listen to. Good luck with that, Constantine said. He hung up, looked at the ruined facility one more time. Somewhere in Metropolis, the false specter was probably already executing more justice. Constantine had maybe an hour before this escalated beyond anyone's ability to contain. He started walking toward downtown, toward where he'd last seen Veldora, toward the thing everyone had been treating as the threat. Time to explain that sometimes the cure was preferable to the disease. Veldora felt it before he saw it. Reality twisting wrong. Not structurally, aesthetically. Like someone rewriting physics for comedy value instead of coherence. He'd been examining a fountain that had started running backward when the sensation hit. The MP said to empty air. He'd noticed the fifth-dimensional signature earlier. Hard to miss when local space-time kept developing opinions. But the entity had been subtle, observing. Now it was acting. Veldora followed the disturbance. Found himself in a plaza where the specter stood over Jason Blood. The demonologist was on his knees, separated from Etrigan by force that shouldn't be able to split that bond. Your demon served hell, the specter pronounced. You harbored it, sheltered corruption within your flesh. Blood looked up. His face showed no fear, just acceptance. I made choices. If this is judgment, I accept it. The specter raised a hand. How noble. Veldora spoke from across the plaza. You're very committed to this performance. The specter turned, regarded Veldora with interest that felt predatory. Another aberration. Another thing requiring correction. Veldora walked closer. Casual. You're not actually judging them. You're playing with cause and effect like it's a game. All existence is a game, the specter said. Its voice carried harmonics that bent local gravity. I simply play it honestly. You're an imp, Veldora observed. Fifth dimensional. Probably MXYZ PTLK based on the theatrical presentation. The false specter's facade cracked, just slightly. Enough to show something else underneath something that grinned at being recognized. Very good, it said. The voice changed. Less resonance, more mischief. Most people can't tell. Because most people follow rules, Veldora said. You're rewriting them mid-game. MXYZPTLK dropped the specter appearance entirely. Revealed his true form, small purple-skinned eyes, too large and too knowing. He floated, ignoring gravity like a suggestion he declined. Finally, MXYZPTLK said. Someone interesting. He gestured at Jason Blood. This one's boring. Always accepting. Never fights back. He looked at Veldora with genuine curiosity. You, though. You're not from around here. Different framework, Veldora agreed. MXYZPTLK clapped. Delightful. He spun in midair. "Show me what you can do," Veldora said. XYZPTLK's expression shifted to mock disappointment. "No, but I'm offering such a wonderful opportunity." He waved at the plaza. "We could reshape this entire city together. Make it interesting." "You mistake me," Veldora said. "I'm not interested in your games. Everyone's interested in games," MXYZPTLK insisted. "They just pretend otherwise." He snapped his fingers. Jason Blood transformed into 17 different versions of himself, each experiencing a different timeline simultaneously. Fun. Veldora's expression went flat. "Stop." Or what XYZPTLK challenged. The temperature dropped. Not gradually, instantly. Space around Veldora became very still, very certain. The playful chaos XYZPTLK had woven through the plaza started encountering resistance. Veldora stepped forward. "You're bending reality because you think it's funny. That's wasteful." XYZPTLK's grin faltered. "Wasteful? Reality isn't a toy?" Veldora said. Each step made the air heavier. "It's a structure. When you mock it, you damage things that can't be repaired." "Oh, please," XYZPTLK scoffed. "I'm fifth dimensional. I can repair anything." "Can you?" Veldora asked. "Can you restore the seconds those people lost? The timeline branches you created, the certainty you dissolved?" XYZPTLK waved dismissively. "Details," Veldora said. "Consequences." Something in his voice made XYZPTLK pause. The imp floated backward, reassessed. This wasn't going like his usual interactions. Usually people either cowered or attacked. This entity was doing neither. "You're no fun," XYZPTLK said. "I'm a storm," Veldora replied. "Storms aren't fun. They're necessary." XYZPTLK laughed. Tried to. But the sound came out uncertain. Around them, reality began stabilizing. The 17 Jason Bloods collapsed back into one. The plaza's twisted geometry straightened. "What are you doing?" XYZPTLK demanded. "Anchoring," Veldora said. "You play with structure." "I am structure." He raised one hand. Not to attack, just to define boundaries. "When you bend things, I unbend them." XYZPTLK's eyes narrowed. "That's cheating." "That's existing," Veldora corrected. For 3 seconds, they stood opposed. Fifth-dimensional chaos against natural disaster given form. Reality between them couldn't decide which authority to obey. Then Trigon's presence erupted from beneath the plaza. Kent Nelson felt time happen out of order, not metaphorically, literally. He experienced the next 7 minutes before living the previous 3. Nabu's consciousness tried to compensate rewinding perception, but the helm couldn't maintain coherent sequence when causality itself was negotiable. Through the golden eye slits, he watched Trigon and XYZPTLK tear holes in what should be fundamental. The demon had erupted from beneath Metropolis with geological fury. 4 eyes burning red form, vast enough to make skyscrapers reconsider their commitment to verticality. Hellfire-scorched concepts more than matter burned. The idea of sanctuary melted the notion of protection. XYZPTLK laughed. The sound rewrote local probability, made unlikely things, certain impossible things, casual. "Oh, wonderful," the imp said, spinning in midair. "A playmate." "You are nothing," Trigon growled. His voice made the ground forget it was supposed to be solid. "I am conquest. Domination. The end of all defiance." XYZPTLK giggled. "You're adorable." Do the scary voice again. Trigon attacked. Hellfire met fifth-dimensional whimsy. Where they collided, physics wrote error messages and gave up. Kent tried to calculate containment vectors. Nabu's processing power, usually sufficient to model stellar collapse, couldn't track the damage. The combat wasn't following rules. One moment, Trigon existed across 17 spatial dimensions simultaneously. The next MXYZTLK had convinced gravity it worked sideways. This reality cannot hold all three, Nabu said through the helm. Three, Kent asked. Then understood. Trigon, MXYZTLK, and the storm entity currently standing motionless 3 blocks away, anchoring what little stability remained. We must choose, Nabu continued. Which threats to exile, which to allow to remain. Kent felt his hands moving through calculations he didn't remember initiating. The helm was planning something that tasted like sacrifice. How, Kent asked. The answer arrived before he finished asking. Felt heavy. Final. Oh, Kent said quietly. I see. He continued watching Trigon and MXYZTLK destroy coherence. Started preparing for the choice that would require everything. Constantine's cigarette was burning at both ends. He stared at it. Watched flame consume filter and tobacco simultaneously meeting in the middle. The cigarette didn't care which direction fire was supposed to travel. Reality had stopped enforcing preferences. Around him, the plaza existed in multiple states. Schrodinger's architecture. Buildings that were both standing and rubble streets that led places they'd never connected to. Sky that couldn't decide if it was day or night, so settled for both. People ran. Some of them ran backward through time, arriving before they'd left. Others ran sideways through probability, splitting into versions that made different choices. Constantine watched a woman trip, fall, and catch herself, all 3 events happening non-sequentially. Zatanna materialized beside him. Or had been there all along. Causality wasn't taking calls. We need to evacuate, she said. To where Constantine gestured at the chaos. Space isn't making sense anymore. She looked at Trigon and MXYZTLK. The demon was trying to dominate existence. The imp was trying to delete it as a punchline. Neither approach was working because they kept interfering with each other's methods. Can you banish them? Zatanna asked. Constantine laughed. It hurt his throat. Came out wrong direction. Love. I can barely banish my own regrets. Those two, they're operating in weight classes where my entire skill set is a footnote. Then what do we do? Constantine pulled out another cigarette. This one burned normally. Small mercies. We find the one thing in this mess that isn't playing games. Zatanna followed his gaze. Saw Veldora standing perfectly still at the plaza's center. Around him, a sphere of consistent physics. Grass that grew in one direction, air that behaved, time that ran forward exclusively. He's stabilizing it, Zatanna said. No, Constantine corrected. He's existing, and existence near him has to remember how it works. He took a drag. Different thing. Can he stop them? Constantine watched Veldora's expression. Calm, focused. Not angry, not afraid. Just present with the weight of a mountain deciding to stay exactly where it was. I don't think he wants us to, Constantine said. I think he's just making sure there's somewhere left to stand when this finishes. Thunder rolled. Lightning followed 3 seconds later, then arrived 4 seconds before the thunder. Causality threw up its hands. Constantine grabbed Zatanna's arm. Stay in his radius. Whatever happens, stay where time still knows what it's doing. They moved toward Veldora. Toward the only piece of Metropolis that still remembered being real. Reality wasn't screaming. It was asking for relief. The sensation had no analog in human experience. Closest approximation exhaustion so profound that unconsciousness became attractive. The fundamental framework holding existence together had been bent, twisted, rewritten, dominated, and mocked until its structural integrity approached theoretical minimum. At the plaza's center, Trigon and MXYZTLK fought without awareness of consequence. Trigon's hellfire was burning through dimensional barriers. Every blast opened portals to domains where suffering was currency, where hope had never evolved, where the concept of mercy had been systematically exterminated. He poured that darkness into local space, trying to corrupt Earth into becoming an extension of his dominion. XYZTLK, countered by deleting context, made Trigon's fire forget what it was burning. Convinced the demon's 4 eyes, they were actually 7 eyes that had never existed. Rewrote the demon's origin story mid-sentence, making Trigon momentarily uncertain if he'd ever conquered anything. The attacks canceled each other out, then amplified, then happened backward, then ceased having happened while still occurring. Space between them folded into Klein bottles. Time formed loops that tangled with themselves. Probability collapsed into quantum superpositions that refused to resolve, and through it all, one constant remained. Veldora. He stood anchored while everything else drifted. Occupied space that refused negotiation. His presence created boundary conditions. Places where the rules had to work because they'd encountered something that simply was without qualification or compromise. Faust, his analytical matrix, drank in the chaos. Not to fight it, not to harness it, just to understand. The entity cataloged every violation of DC's physical laws, every deviation from local magical principles, every way that reality could be bent. Then it cataloged what couldn't be bent, what remained constant, what defined the floor beneath which existence couldn't sink. The analysis completed, Veldora understood this universe now, not academically, fundamentally, knew which laws were suggestions and which were load-bearing, knew where the framework could flex and where it would shatter. He raised one hand, not to attack, to define. Around him, the sphere of stability expanded, 50 meters, 100, 200. Wherever his influence reached causality, remembered its job. Time ran correctly. Space behaved. Magic operated on consistent principles. Trigon noticed. Turned 4 eyes toward this new variable. Saw something that resisted corruption not through purity, but through sheer categorical difference. You, Trigon rumbled. What are you? Veldora didn't answer. Maintained focus, held the sphere, prevented this section of Metropolis from dissolving entirely. XYZPTLK noticed too. Floated over, curious. Poked at the stability sphere. Found it impervious to his usual tricks. Equations he could normally rewrite simply existed immune to editorial revision. Hey, XYZTLK said. How are you doing that? Veldora's eyes tracked both entities. Measured threat vectors, calculated intervention points, decided against all of them. Not my fight, he said quietly. But you're interfering, XYZPTLK complained. I was having fun making the city interesting. The city was eating itself, Veldora observed. I'm just making sure there's something left afterward. Trigon roared, sent hellfire toward the sphere. The flames hit the boundary and stopped. Didn't extinguish, stopped. Encountered existence too stubborn to burn, too fundamental to corrupt. Submit, Trigon commanded. All things kneel before. No, Veldora said. Not dismissive, just factual. Your dominance doesn't work on things that existed before your rules. He expanded the sphere another 100 meters. Brought more of Metropolis back into coherence. People caught in the boundary transition gasped as causality reasserted. They'd been experiencing multiple timelines simultaneously. Now they existed in only one with memories that couldn't quite reconcile. Zatanna and Constantine stood at the edge, watching. He's not fighting them, Zatanna said. He's outlasting them. Constantine agreed. Being more real than their bullshit until the bullshit gives up. Can he do that indefinitely? Constantine watched Veldora's expression. Saw concentration without strain, presence without effort. No, Constantine said. He can do it casually. That's worse. Why worse? Because it means he's been holding back. Constantine said. This whole time, every containment we tried, every escalation we threw at him, he could have just made us irrelevant. He lit another cigarette. He chose not to. Then why now, Zatanna asked. Constantine looked at the chaos beyond the sphere. At Trigon's Dominion meeting, XYZPTLK's chaos creating a wasteland of broken physics. Because now, there's something that actually offends him, Constantine said. Those two aren't just dangerous. They're sloppy. They're breaking things they can't fix. And Constantine gestured at Veldora. He's a storm, natural force. Those things don't abide waste. Superman arrived too late to matter. He'd been on the far side of Metropolis, evacuating shelters, maintaining order among the orderly. By the time he reached the plaza, the combat had already moved beyond his weight class. He watched Trigon's hellfire splash against Veldora's sphere. Watched XYZPTLK's reality distortions dissolve at the boundary. Watched the entity he'd tried to contain, now containing the catastrophe. Wonder Woman landed beside him. Took in the situation with tactical efficiency. Assessment, Superman asked. Beyond our scale, she said. 3 entities operating at cosmic level. She hesitated, decorative. Superman's jaw set. We're not decorative, we're irrelevant, Diana finished. Not unkindly, just accurate. She pointed at Veldora. He's maintaining a survivable zone. We should evacuate people to it. Superman looked at her. You want to rely on him? After everything, I want people to survive, Diana said. If that means cooperating with the entity we spent 3 days trying to imprison, then yes. Something in Superman's expression cracked. Just slightly, enough to show the doubt underneath. We made a mistake, Diana said quietly. We maintained order, Superman corrected. That's what we do. Diana looked at the chaos beyond the sphere. At reality, eating itself. At 2 cosmic threats that had emerged because Constantine had summoned one. And the other had come to play. Our order did this, she said. Superman didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because somewhere beneath the certainty, beneath 5 years of regime conviction, he knew she was right. Dr. Fate materialized above them. The helm's light had dimmed to barely visible. Evacuation protocols, Fate said. Move all personnel within the stable zone. He looked at Veldora. While it remains, it'll remain, Superman said. His voice carried less certainty than usual. For now, Fate agreed. But this reality cannot hold all 3 entities. One must be removed. He paused. Or all will be lost. Which one, Diana asked. Fate looked at Trigon. At XYZPTLK. At Veldora, holding existence together through sheer categorical presence. The choice has already been made, Fate said. We simply must implement it. What choice, Superman demanded. Fate descended. Began moving through gestures Superman didn't recognize. Ancient, preparatory. The kind of magic that required prices paid in absolute terms. The choice that costs everything, Fate said. And saves what remains. Constantine watched from the sphere's edge. Recognized the casting. Knew what it meant. Oh, bloody hell, Constantine muttered. He's building a void gate. Zatanna's eyes widened. That requires a sacrifice, Constantine finished. Yeah. He looked at Fate. At the determined, desperate movements of an entity preparing to buy salvation with annihilation. He's going to throw them all into dimensional exile, Constantine said, including himself. It's the only way to seal it. Zatanna reached for her wand. We have to stop. No, Constantine said, caught her hand. We don't. Because he's right. He looked at the chaos. At Trigon and XYZPTLK tearing reality apart for opposed reasons. At Veldora, maintaining the only island of sanity left. The universe is asking for relief, Constantine said. Fate's giving it the only mercy available. At the plaza's center, Trigon and XYZPTLK continued their eternal argument dominance versus dissolution tyranny versus chaos. Neither noticed Fate's casting building behind them. Neither noticed Veldora tracking the spell's architecture with interest. Neither noticed the moment reality began preparing to evict its most problematic tenants. The void gate was opening. Now the fight is becoming more intense than ever. We have Trigon burning everything, and XYZPLK turning reality into a joke, but Veldora is just standing there, fixing the world by existing. It is quite cool when he is not attacking them, and he is just being so real that their magic cannot hurt him. Constantine was right when he said Veldora is winning by just outlasting the madness. It basically proves that natural laws are stronger than demons or imps. Also, seeing the most powerful magic users realize they are just decorative is wild. Who do you think is actually the strongest entity in this plaza right now? Drop a comment with your pick and let us see how this ends. The Void Gate was 90% complete when Superman made the decision. He'd been coordinating evacuation, moving civilians into Veldora's stability sphere, maintaining order while reality fractured. But watching fate build the casting, watching the only solution involve exile for all three threats, triggered the calculation Superman had run 1,000 times before. Control the uncontrollable. Remove what can't be contained. He triggered the channel to fate. Include the storm entity in the Void Gate. Kent Nelson's hands stuttered mid-gesture. Through the helm, Nabu processed the implications. Superman that wasn't. It's a threat, Superman said. We've established that. We exile all three or we exile nothing. The entity is maintaining structural integrity, Fate countered. Without it, the city collapses before we complete the casting. Then we work faster, Superman said. His voice carried absolute certainty. I'm not leaving one cosmic threat free while removing the others. Diana's voice cut across the channel. Cal, reconsider. The decision is made, Superman said. Fate looked at the Void Gate. At Veldora, holding existence together, 300 meters away. At Trigon and XYZPTLK, still tearing holes in what should be fundamental. Nabu's consciousness weighed options. Found none acceptable. All paths led to catastrophe. The question was which catastrophe cost less. Fate modified the casting. Began including parameters for a third target. The Void Gate's aperture widened. Started calculating trajectory to encompass Veldora along with the demon and imp. This will end poorly, Nabu said through the helm. Kent felt his hands moving anyway, following Superman's directive, maintaining the chain of command even as it drove toward catastrophe. Veldora sensed the spell structure change. Faust cataloged the modification, analyzed the new vectors, understood immediately what they meant. They were trying to seal him again, not imprison, exile. Dimensional banishment to a space outside normal existence. Close enough to the infinity prison's isolation that the echo resonated through every particle of his being. 300 years in dark, alone, sealed. The memory wasn't metaphorical. It was structural, written into how he existed. The fundamental trauma that had defined his emergence from that cage. The promise he'd made to himself that nothing would ever bind him again. Veldora's expression didn't change. He simply stopped holding back. Nothing exploded. The sky didn't tear. Thunder didn't roll. There were no dramatic indicators of transformation, no visible surge of energy. But every being within 20 miles felt the shift. Reality around Veldora stopped being negotiable. The stability sphere he'd been maintaining, the pocket of consistent physics, inverted. Became absolute. Expanded not through force, but through categorical declaration. This is how things work. His presence stated, not requested, not suggested, declared. The expansion moved at the speed of certainty. One moment Veldora occupied a small zone of order. The next, his framework overlaid 6 city blocks, then 12, then 30. Everywhere it touched, his rules applied. Causality ran forward. Time progressed linearly. Space maintained consistent dimensions. Magic operated on principles that couldn't be rewritten mid-casting. Trigon's hellfire hit the boundary and stopped. Didn't extinguish. Stopped encountering existence that refused corruption on grounds of fundamental incompatibility. XYZPTLK's reality distortions collapsed. The imp tried to convince gravity it worked sideways, and gravity declined to be convinced. tried to delete context, and found context had become mandatory. "Hey, MXYZPT-Luck protested? That's not fair." Veldora didn't respond, wasn't interested in dialogue. He walked toward the Hall of Justice with steps that covered distance through spatial compression rather than speed. Behind him, the framework held. Ahead, regime infrastructure began encountering problems. In the Batcave, every monitoring system went dark simultaneously, not failed, dismissed. The surveillance network that had taken 5 years to build, that covered every strategic point in 12 cities, simply stopped being relevant to how reality was operating in Metropolis. Bruce stared at blank screens, ran diagnostics. Everything checked functional. The systems worked perfectly. They just couldn't observe what Veldora had decided they couldn't observe. Alfred appeared at his shoulder. "Sir, we should never have tried to cage it," Bruce said quietly. He pulled up schematics, calculated intervention points, found none. Every approach vector required operating within Veldora's framework. And that framework didn't permit the kind of tactics Bruce specialized in. He opened a channel to Superman. "Abort the Void Gate." Static. He tried Diana, Constantine, Oracle. All channels dead within the expanding zone. Bruce looked at the last functioning monitor satellite feed from high orbit. Watched Metropolis transform from above. Watched the boundary of absolute order spread like ink in water. "He's not escalating," Bruce said to the empty cave. "He's finishing something we started." Alfred remained silent. There were no words appropriate for watching certainty itself rewrite a city. Superman tried to fly toward the Hall of Justice, found himself grounded, not through force, through category error. In Veldora's framework, flight required following specific aerodynamic principles. Superman's method of ignoring physics through Kryptonian biology became non-functional. He hit the ground, stood, tried again, same result. Diana landed beside him. Actually landed wings, working through conventional lift rather than divine authority. Her expression showed the same realization. "Our powers are contextual," she said. "He's changing the context." Superman's jaw set. "Then we walk." They moved through streets that remembered how to be streets. Past buildings that stood at proper angles. Through air that behaved. Everything worked perfectly. Just not the way they needed it to work. Ahead, Veldora reached the Hall of Justice. He raised one hand. Didn't strike the building, didn't summon energy. Just defined a boundary condition. Structures used for imprisonment no longer maintained structural integrity. The hall's detention wing collapsed. Not explosively, methodically. Every cell, every containment unit, every binding ward dissolved. Meta-humans who'd been held without trial for years suddenly found themselves free. They stumbled out confused. Looked at Veldora. He ignored them. Moved to the next target. The armory. Veldora touched the wall. Didn't breach it. Declared it conceptually obsolete. The building that housed regime weaponry tools of control instruments of forced compliance forgot it had been built. Returned to component atoms over the span of 9 seconds. No explosion, no fire, just systematic deconstruction. Superman ran. Diana kept pace. They were still kilometers away when Veldora moved to the command center. This required more precision. The building held people. Veldora had no interest in killing staff. He separated the infrastructure from the occupants. Every server, every database, every surveillance node deleted. Personnel found themselves standing in an empty building that had forgotten what it was for. Regime coordination died. 5 years of consolidated authority. The network that let Superman know everything, control everything, respond to everything, ceased to exist. Not damaged, unmade. Dr. Fate felt the Void Gate destabilize. The casting required consistent magical principles. Veldora's framework was overriding those principles. The spell structure began adapting, then failing, then fragmenting. "We've lost containment," Fate said. Superman's voice came through strained. "Keep casting. We can still—" "No." Fate interrupted. The entity has exceeded the gate's parameters. He watched Veldora systematically erase regime infrastructure. We can't exile what we can't define. Then what do we do? Superman demanded. Fate looked at Trigon and Mexyz PTLK. The demon and imp had stopped fighting. Both stared at Veldora with something approaching concern. They'd been playing with reality. This thing was reality asserting dominance. We prepare for the only option remaining, Fate said. Total severance. What does that mean? Superman asked. It means I'm going to throw all three of them into the void, Fate said. And myself with them. It's the only seal that will hold. The channel went silent. Constantine watched from a rooftop that still existed. He'd made it to high ground when the expansion started, stood smoking while Metropolis transformed below. Zatanna stood beside him, both of them inside Veldora's framework, both of them witnessing. He's not even angry, Zatanna said. No, Constantine agreed. Anger would be sloppier. This is, he searched for the word, correction. Like editing a document, removing what doesn't belong. What doesn't belong? Zatanna asked. The regime, Constantine said. Not the people, the system. He pointed at where the Hall of Justice had been. At the detention centers dissolving. At the command infrastructure returning to base materials. He's deleting every mechanism Superman built to enforce order. Why? Zatanna asked. Constantine took a long drag. Because they tried to cage him. And cages are what you build when you've given up on coexistence. Veldora moved through the city, left civilians untouched, left buildings standing, left infrastructure intact. Only the instruments of control dissolved in his wake. Prisons, armories, surveillance hubs, detention centers, interrogation facilities. Everything the regime had built to maintain its version of peace, gone. Not destroyed. Categorically denied. He's not fighting a war, Constantine said. He's refusing one. Unilaterally. Below, Superman reached the perimeter of Veldora's framework. Stood at the boundary where regime authority ended and natural law began. Tried to cross. Found he couldn't. Not physically barred, categorically excluded. In Veldora's framework, beings who built cages were incompatible with positions of authority. Superman stood at the edge of his own city, unable to enter, unable to stop what was happening. Forced to watch his 5 years of control systematically erased. Diana arrived beside him, tried to cross, failed. We're being denied, she said. Superman's hands clenched. This is my city. No, came a voice. They turned. Batman stood behind them. He'd arrived without announcement, stood in armor that looked more tactical than usual. His expression unreadable. It was never yours, Batman said. You just convinced yourself otherwise. Superman spun to face him. We saved this city, protected it, maintained order when chaos. You built a prison, Batman interrupted, and called it peace. He looked at the dissolving infrastructure. Now, something that actually understands structure is showing you what order looks like without cages. Superman stepped toward him. You're defending this. I'm recognizing it, Batman said. There's a difference. He looked past Superman toward where Veldora continued his methodical work. We tried to control something that doesn't recognize our authority. This is the consequence. Then help me stop it, Superman said. I can't, Batman replied. Neither can you. Neither can anyone. He turned to leave. The only thing we can do now is survive what comes next. He vanished into shadows that still worked in his favor. Superman looked back toward the city. Toward Veldora. Toward 5 years of certainty dissolving like morning frost. For the first time in half a decade, Clark Kent had no idea what to do. Veldora completed his circuit. Every regime stronghold within Metropolis gone. Every tool of forced compliance erased. Every mechanism that turned citizens into subjects deleted. The city remained. The people remained. The basic infrastructure remained. Just the machinery of control had been removed. He stood in the center of what used to be the regime's command nexus, looked at the emptiness, felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just completion. They'd tried to seal him. Again, had proven they would always try, would always see him as something to be contained, rather than something to be acknowledged. So he'd removed their ability to contain anything. Around him, Metropolis existed in perfect stability. Buildings stood. Power flowed, water ran. Everything worked, except the systems that enforced obedience. Those were simply gone. Veldora turned toward where fate stood with the destabilized Void Gate. Toward where Trigon and XYZTLK watched with newfound caution. Toward the next phase of what needed to happen. The storm had stopped reacting. It was deciding. But yeah, that was honestly the best way to beat a dictator. It proves that the regime was never about safety. It was only about fear. Now that the fear is gone, and Superman looks completely lost. Some of us may think regime can survive without their weapons, but maybe this could be the very end of their fucking rule. Kent Nelson felt the helm calculating his death, not metaphorically. Nabu ran the numbers with clinical precision. The Void Gate required an anchor. Something to seal the passage after Trigon and XYZTLK were expelled. Something with enough metaphysical mass to prevent their return. The Helm of Fate qualified, which meant Kent Nelson died with it. He stood in the ruined plaza, hands already moving through the final configurations. Around him, Metropolis existed in Veldora's framework, ordered stable, stripped of regime control mechanisms. Trigon and XYZPTLK had stopped fighting. Both watched Veldora with newfound wariness. The storm entity stood perfectly still. Not threatening, not negotiating, just present with the weight of something that had finished one task and begun considering the next. Kent felt the Void Gate stabilize, felt its aperture widen to dimensions that hurt to perceive. The spell structure was complete. All that remained was activation, and the price. Nabu's voice resonated through the helm. This reality cannot sustain all four entities. The demon, the imp, the storm, and order itself. Kent understood. 4 cosmic-level presences in one dimension, like trying to fit mountains into a cup. Something had to give. Which one, Ken asked, though he already knew. Nabu's response came without hesitation, all but one. The Void Gate pulsed. Kent felt its hunger, felt the dimensional aperture calculating mass trajectories, sealing requirements. It could take Trigon barely, could take XYZPTLK with effort. Could take Veldora. No, Kent said. We're not forcing the storm entity. Nabu's processing paused. It represents a threat. It represents stability, Kent corrected. Look at what it's doing. They both looked. Veldora stood at the center of functional reality. The only reason Metropolis hadn't dissolved entirely under the combined assault of hell and chaos. The only anchor keeping causality from complete collapse. We remove the storm and the city dies, Kent said. We keep the storm and we cannot seal the void Nabu finished. The gate requires precise parameters. 4 entities exceed capacity. Then we don't seal it from outside, Kent said. His hands shifted the spell structure. Modified the architecture. We seal it from inside. The helm processed the implications. That would require a sacrifice, Kent agreed. Someone to serve as the lock. He felt the spell configuration accept the new parameters. Felt it calculating who could anchor a dimensional seal of that magnitude. Only one answer existed. Kent Nelson took a breath. Wondered if he'd have time to say goodbye to anyone. Decided it didn't matter. This wasn't about farewells. This was about the only choice that left anything standing. He activated the Void Gate. The aperture opened vertical, not black, not empty. Beyond color, beyond concept. A space where existence became theoretical, where matter and energy forgot their relationship, where time existed as pure potential without direction. Trigon felt the pull, tried to resist, found his mass being redefined as compatible with void space. His four eyes widened, genuine surprise crossing features that hadn't known uncertainty in eons. No, Trigon roared. I am Dominion. I am. You're leaving, Kent said. The helm's power channeled through his voice, transforming it into command that bent local physics. The void gate's parameters locked around the demon, began pulling. Trigon tried to anchor himself, sent roots of corrupted reality into the ground, into the air, into the conceptual framework of Earth itself. Found every anchor severed by Veldora's absolute rules. In the storm entity's domain, hell had no purchase. Trigon slid toward the aperture, slowly, fighting every centimeter, but sliding nonetheless. XZPTLK tried to delete the void gate, told reality it didn't exist. Reality operating under Veldora's framework declined to be rewritten. The imp's usual tricks bounced off structure that refused negotiation. Wait, XYZPTLK said, his playful tone gone, replaced by something approaching concern. This isn't fun anymore. It never was, Kent replied. The gate's pull intensified, caught the imp in gravitational effects that transcended normal physics. XYZPTLK tried to slip sideways through dimensions, found every exit sealed. Tried to convince the gate he'd never been there, found causality refusing the revision. His form began stretching toward the aperture. You can't do this, XYZPTLK protested. I'm fifth dimensional. I'm outside your rules. You were Kent agreed. Then you came here, played here, made yourself relevant to local existence. He felt the spell structure tighten. Now you're subject to local consequences. The imp's eyes widened. Oh, he said quietly. That's clever. It's necessary, Kent corrected. Both entities, demon and imp hell, and chaos slid toward the void. Their combined mass created distortions that made reality weep. Space-time buckled. Causality stuttered. Magic everywhere on Earth felt the strain. Fate felt it most of all. Felt the gate trying to stabilize, failing, requiring an anchor it didn't have. He looked at Veldora. The storm entity watched without expression, understood what was happening, made no move to interfere. You could stop this, Kent said. Not accusation, just observation. Veldora's response came quiet. Why would I? To save me, Kent suggested. Veldora tilted his head slightly. I don't know you. You tried to cage me. Why would I care if you die? Kent felt the brutal honesty of it. No malice, no cruelty, just the truth of something that operated outside human moral frameworks. Fair enough, Kent said. He turned back to the gate, prepared for the next step. Veldora spoke again. But you're doing this correctly. Kent paused. What? You're removing the problems, Veldora said. Not trying to control them. Not trying to make them serve your vision. He looked at the void gate. Just removing them. That's honest. Kent almost laughed. Would have if he had time. Instead, he nodded once. Thank you. Don't thank me, Veldora said. I'm not helping. I'm just not stopping you. He paused. There's a difference. Kent understood. Veldora wasn't a hero, wasn't a villain, just a force that existed watching humans make choices and living with consequences. Trigon and XYZPTLK hit the void gate simultaneously. Their combined entry created a shock wave that shattered windows in 6 states. Reality screamed, then settled. The gate held them, but it wouldn't hold long without a seal. Kent stepped forward. Nabu's consciousness stirred. Kent. Are you certain? No, Kent admitted. But I'm committed. He walked toward the aperture, felt the void's pull, felt his body beginning to translate into the metaphysical mass required for a permanent seal, felt the helm calculating how long his consciousness would remain coherent during the transformation. Approximately 17 seconds, Nabu provided. Kent smiled. That's 16 more than I expected. Behind him, Veldora spoke one last time. This place is already breaking. Kent turned. Saw the storm entity standing motionless, but somehow diminished. Not weak or compressed. Pulling in the framework he'd imposed. Reducing his influence. You're leaving, Kent said. Veldora nodded once. This reality can't hold both order and storm at cosmic scale. You're paying with your life. I'm paying with my presence. He looked at the sky, seemed to listen to something beyond human perception. Fair trade? Where will you go? Kent asked. Somewhere else, Veldora said. The answer that defined his entire existence. Kent felt the void gate pulling harder. Time was running out. He had maybe 30 seconds before the seal window closed. For what it's worth, Kent said you were right. About what Veldora asked. Cages don't work, Kent said. He looked at Superman standing at the framework's boundary, unable to enter, watching everything collapse. We should have learned that before now. Veldora's expression didn't change. But something in his eyes suggested agreement. Kent turned to the void, began walking forward, felt his physical form dissolving, felt the helm's power converting his existence into pure metaphysical anchor weight. Behind him, Veldora's framework began dissipating, withdrawing, returning Metropolis to normal physics, damaged, traumatized, but survivable physics. The storm was leaving. Kent Nelson was dying, and reality would survive both departures. He stepped into the void. Bruce Wayne stood on a rooftop in Gotham, watching the eastern sky. The rift closed 12 seconds after fate entered, sealed itself with golden light that faded to nothing. Took with it Trigon, Mex YZPTL, and Dr. Fate. The news feeds were already spinning narratives. Regime victory. Cosmic threats eliminated. Order restored. Bruce knew better. He pulled up casualty reports, structural damage assessments, economic impact projections. The numbers were catastrophic. Not from combat, from infrastructure collapse. From 5 years of control mechanisms being systematically deleted in one afternoon. The regime had lost its eyes, its coordination networks, its detention systems. Every tool Superman had built to maintain his version of peace, gone. And without those tools, the regime was just a man who could fly. We confused control with safety, Bruce said to the empty rooftop. Alfred's voice came through the cowl calm. Sir, the regime, Bruce clarified. We watched Superman build a prison and called it paradise. Watched him turn authority into reflex. And when something challenged that authority, it all collapsed. Will you oppose him now? Alfred asked. Bruce looked toward Metropolis, toward where Superman stood among the ruins of his command infrastructure, probably trying to calculate how to rebuild, how to restore control. I always was, Bruce said. He just couldn't see it through the certainty. He turned away from the skyline, started planning. The regime still existed. Superman still believed he was right. But the tools that made him unchallengeable were gone. The war wasn't over. It was just starting from honest ground. Clark Kent stood in an empty building. 30 minutes ago, it had been the regime command center. Coordinator of 12 cities, eyes on 40 million citizens. The infrastructure that let him know everything, respond instantly, maintain perfect order. Now it was 4 walls and silence. Diana stood beside him. She'd been quiet since Fate's sacrifice, since watching the void seal, since walking through the city and seeing what Veldora had unmade. We maintained order, Clark said. His voice sounded hollow even to himself. Did we? Diana asked quietly. Clark looked at her. We saved lives, protected people, made them safe. From what Diana turned to face him. From choices, from freedom. She gestured at the empty room. We built this because we couldn't accept a world we didn't control. We built this because the world needed it, Clark said. But the certainty that had carried him through 5 years wavered, didn't it? Diana didn't answer immediately. When she spoke, her voice carried weight. I don't know anymore, Cal. I thought I did. But standing here in the ruins of everything we built, She paused. I don't know if we saved anyone. Clark's hands clenched. The regime stands. I'm still here. We can rebuild. Can we? Diana interrupted. The storm entity deleted every mechanism we used to enforce order. And it did so in hours. She met his eyes. What does that tell you? That we need better mechanisms, Clark said. Stronger systems. Diana shook her head. That we were wrong, Cal. That control isn't the same as safety. That cages, no matter how well-intentioned, are still cages. Clark opened his mouth to argue. Found no words came. Because somewhere beneath the certainty, beneath 5 years of conviction, he knew she was right. But he couldn't admit it. Couldn't let himself believe that everything Metropolis, the regime, the New World Order, had been built on a mistake. So he stood in the empty building and said nothing. Diana waited, then sighed. When you're ready to see it, she said, I'll still be here. She left. Clark heard her footsteps echo, then silence. He looked at the empty command center, at the blank screens, at the infrastructure that would take years to rebuild, and wondered what he'd actually been protecting. 3 days later, a child in Metropolis asked her mother why the sky looked different. The mother looked up, saw blue, saw clouds, saw normal atmospheric conditions. It doesn't look different, the mother said. The child insisted, pointed, described something that wasn't there or had been there briefly and left in absence. The mother didn't understand. But across Metropolis, across the eastern seaboard, others reported the same thing. A sense of missing weight, of pressure that had been present then withdrawn. Scientists attributed it to atmospheric adjustment after the reality distortions. Psychologists called it mass trauma response. Meteorologists shrugged and filed reports about anomalous readings that had since normalized. No one called it what it was. The storm had left. Magic users felt it differently. Spells that had cast instantly now took seconds. Rituals required more preparation. The background magical field had thinned, not gone, just less responsive. Like reality had expended enormous effort and needed time to recover. In his apartment, Constantine lit a cigarette and didn't say anything. Satana sat across from him, both of them feeling the absence. It's quieter, she said finally. Yeah, Constantine agreed. He took a long drag. Cost us, though, Dr. Fate Satana said quietly. And everything the regime built, Constantine added. And the illusion that control equals safety. He looked at the smoke curling toward the ceiling. Expensive lesson? Was it worth it? Satana asked. Constantine considered. They'd survived. Reality hadn't collapsed. The regime had been wounded, but not destroyed. Superman still ruled, but without the infrastructure that made him inescapable. We're alive, Constantine said. That's worth something. It wasn't an answer, but it was all he had. The storm was gone. The damage was not. Metropolis rebuilt. Slowly. Without surveillance networks. Without perfect coordination. People made choices. Some good, some terrible. Life continued the way it always had. Messy, uncertain, free. The regime adapted. Superman remained. But his absolute certainty had cracked. Not broken, he was too committed for that. But cracked. Enough to let doubt seep in. Batman watched from Gotham, waited, prepared. The insurgency quietly grew, and somewhere in a dimension that didn't have a name in a space between spaces, Dr. Fate maintained his vigil. Holding the seal, keeping Trigon and MXYZ Taug locked away. Forever conscious, forever imprisoned, forever paying the price for a world that survived. Kent Nelson's last thought before consciousness fragmented beyond recovery was simple. Worth it. The void accepted his sacrifice without comment, and reality, damaged but intact, continued turning.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss our future videos. Thank you for watching and we will see you next time.